Breaking news here on the Q. The Philadelphia Phillies have themselves a new manager. Joe Girardi coming in after the firing of Gabe Kapler a couple weeks ago. Kapler, of course, remember, led the Phillies to an even 500 record, 81-81, third in the NL East, 16 games back. Girardi won a World Series with the Yankees in 2009, beat the Phillies to do so. His managerial record sitting at .988 and .794, and he comes in as the new man to take over the Phillies and right the ship.
And we're going to bring in our David Sampson, and you are the guy anybody would want to talk to right now. Former president of the Marlins, you hired Joe Girardi back in 2006. You know him well. Do you think the Phillies made the right choice?
So from the beginning, what I wanted the Phillies to do was to go the anti-Kapler route, and that means two things. Gabe Kapler was fired because he had an inability to run a team and be a good in-game manager, both from a bullpen and a 25-man roster standpoint. And the second thing is his eccentricities made him a little tight and made the players tight. I wanted a good in-game manager and someone who would make the team looser. That's why I wanted them to go hard after Joe Maddon. With Joe Girardi, they're getting one of the two. He's a very good in-game manager. I never had one complaint about his managing of the team during the course of the 9 innings. My issue was the other 21 hours of the day when we had tons of problems with Joe Girardi. My hope is that he has matured and gotten better since his first job in 2006, but he's got a tough owner to work with who's very, very involved.
Expand a little bit on that. What were some of the problems that you experienced?
Mr. Girardi had a huge interest in being involved in the 25-man roster makeup. He felt he had the right to choose who was going to be on the roster. He had the right to choose every one of his coaches, what their salaries were going to be, how long the coaches' contracts were going to be. So he felt that he had all of this stuff that he could do. Now, he was a first-year manager, and he was very much wanted by our owner, so it's possible that empowered him. So my hope is during the interview process, he showed humility, and he showed the ability to work with the GM, Matt Klentak, and with the owner, John Middleton, because if he can't do that, he's going to suffer the same fate that he suffered with the Marlins.
He was interviewed twice for the job for the Phillies, if the reports are to be believed. Buck Showalter also interviewed twice. Dusty Baker also interviewed twice. Now, when you look at the recent hires here in terms of these openings for Major League managers, teams are going with younger managers, inexperienced managers. The Phillies did that with Gabe Kapler. Do you get the sense maybe they've learned their lesson by bringing in an experienced guy like Girardi?
So the rule with hiring and firing managers is you go from one extreme and then you go to the other extreme. So it's very simple. If you go with a young, inexperienced manager, as soon as you fire him, you go older and experienced. As soon as they fire Girardi, because every manager gets hired to be fired, when the Phillies fire Girardi, they're going to go back to young and inexperienced. So you just go back and forth like a roller coaster.
So let's talk about some of his success, though. Of course, when he was there with the Marlins, won NL Manager of the Year in 2006. He actually beat the Phillies in the World Series as the manager of the Yankees in 2009. So he does have success under his belt, definitely.
Oh, listen, with a good team, he can do a lot of good things. The Phillies right now are not good enough to make the playoffs. I don't think this hiring puts the Phillies in position where they're favorites to win either the NL East or even the wild card. They've got an albatross of a contract with Bryce Harper, who's underperforming. They've got an issue with David Robertson and his health. They have the best catcher in the game in JT Realmuto. How do you lock him up? Should you lock him up? Their pitching staff is in shambles. They've got to now go and help that team in order to even try to make the playoffs.
You mentioned Bryce Harper there. Obviously, he's the poster boy for the Phillies. How do you see that relationship going? When a new manager like this comes in and you've got a big guy like Harper, what's the first move when you're an experienced guy like Girardi?
Oh, Joe Girardi spoke to Bryce Harper long before he got hired. I promise you that he called the leaders of that team. He has spoken to JT Realmuto, to Bryce Harper, and he wants them to buy into what Girardi's doing. And remember, the owner of the Phillies was polling his players about whether Joe Girardi would be a good fit and a good manager. And the players all like Joe Girardi. He is very good in game. It's the intangibles that make me worried.
Bringing in David Sampson here, former president of the Marlins, hired Joe Girardi back in 2006, so you know him well. Let's talk about big picture here, NL East. Especially with the Nationals looking like they could possibly win the World Series right now. This is a very competitive division, and the Phillies hired Girardi wanting to win now.
Yeah, I'd like to tell you about a concept called owner envy. It's real and it happens. Right now in Philadelphia, they are rooting so hard for Houston they can hardly contain themselves. The last thing they want to have happen is for the Nationals to win a World Series ring after having lost Bryce Harper. The Phillies sign him, the Phillies get worse, the Nationals get better and end up winning it all. So they're going to act like they're rooting for their fellow owners and how excited they are. That's not the case at all. John Middleton is sitting there going crazy. He hires Joe Girardi, not for later, not for tomorrow, for today, Jeremy and Amanda. He needs them to finish ahead of the Nationals next year desperately.
And taking a look at their past 5 season records here, all the way back from 2015, I'm trying to find a winning season on there, and I don't really see one. The best they did was back in this past season, 2019, and even 500, 81 in 81. So the Mets were really crossing their fingers that Girardi's going to do this. If you are Joe Girardi, or what you think he's going to do day one on the job, what's the first change he makes?
Well, the first thing managers do is they contact all their players. So he's on the phone to his players. And the first thing he does as manager is he sets the ground rules and the expectations. He is a very he's militant in terms of how he operates, but he's also a player's manager. He demands respect to the game. He demands hard play, on-time performance, not like the airlines. And he basically will say to them, listen, forget what's happened here previously. We have a team right now. He'll motivate them by saying, we've got the 25 guys we want, and we can get all the way. We can get a ring. I've done it. We can do it together. Because remember, as a player, he's won, and as a manager, he's won a World Series. The question is, do they have the actual talent? And baseball has a way of showing teams what they really are over the course of a season.
And you've already mentioned the pitching aspect of this team is something that needs to be addressed in the offseason for the Phillies. So that's obviously going to be one of the things that's high on the list. In terms of the division, you talk about what the Nationals are potentially doing by winning a World Series. As you look at the openings, we got to talk about the New York Mets. Eduardo Perez, Carlos Beltran, names that are being bandied about. How much does this hiring of Girardi, if the reports are true, mean for the Mets?
So the Mets were never going to hire Joe Girardi. That was all just drummed up and interesting and fun to interview and spend some time learning and with Joe Girardi. He is not a fit with the Wilpon family. He is just too, no matter how he's changed since '06, there's no chance that the Mets were going to go spend $3 to $4 to $5 to $6 million on someone who is just going to be potentially disrespectful and intolerant of any upper-level meddling. That said, the Mets are looking at younger managers, first-time managers. They're trying to see if they can find somebody to get that team to perform, to get that pitching rotation to perform, and to get the overall team to perform, because the Mets have been even worse than the Phillies in terms of performance and in terms of expectations. They were supposed to be great last year with that rotation, and it just went south.
All right, David, thank you so much. So again, breaking news this afternoon here on HQ. The Phillies have hired Joe Girardi as their new manager. Of course, still a lot of vacancies with a lot of teams. Some of them have been filled in. Joe Girardi, Joe Madden, David Ross. We are keeping a very close eye on all of these moving parts. Keep it right here on HQ.